This is the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. I'm Ty Higgins. The latest edition of Our Ohio magazine features an issue that Ohio Farm Bureau continuously stands up for, defends, and attempts to make better, talking about the CAUV program. Joining us this week on the podcast are CAUV expert, Ohio Farm Bureau Policy Counsel Leah Curtis, and our Director of Editorial Content and Managing Editor of Our Ohio, Kelly Milligan-Stammen. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ty.
So we'll get into what we're talking about in this magazine in a bit, Leah, but just to kind of set the stage, a really 30,000-foot view, background on CAUV and our involvement as an organization over the years with it.
Sure. So CAUV is a different way of assessing property for property taxes. Instead of using the market value, the auditor will use the agricultural value, and that uses a calculation that uses agricultural data. This was established through a constitutional amendment that was passed in 1973. Ohio Farm Bureau was a big supporter, obviously, of that and pushing that and getting it passed. It passed with about 75% of the vote, actually, which is pretty high percentage for any constitutional amendment in our state's history. And so over the years, we have been involved in developing the program back in the 70s, keeping it relevant, making sure it's updated. We did a very large reform push in 2014 to 2017, where we were addressing some issues in the calculation, making sure that that calculation was as accurate as possible. And so we answer questions every single day from members about how the program works, how they can qualify, how they can get in, how does their value work, and provide that information to auditors, lawmakers, local government officials, school officials as well, to make sure people understand how this program actually works.
Leah mentioned the tweaks that go along in this program. There was one just a couple of weeks ago about woodland values, and Leah and I will talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast. But just kind of setting the stage that things change constantly in agriculture, and as she mentioned, even since the 70s, there's been a lot of tweaking and a lot of changes that had to be made to this program in order to make it viable. Kelly, as you put this together, I remember that meeting we had with our communications team, and you brought this up and you talked about all the different ways that we can cover CAUV. Why was it important to make this edition all about the program in and of itself?
Well, I think, giving that historical context, like Leah just did, we try to do as much as we could in the magazine with that, and to kind of relate to our members what they're experiencing today. It's no secret values are rising. The current climate of our property values in the state of Ohio is high, but it's important to remember that without CAUV, those numbers would be astronomical, off the charts for our members, and for all practical purposes make it unattainable to continue to farm in a lot of ways. Second, Leah mentioned it as well, the eternal vigilance with which Farm Bureau has helped protect CAUV from a legislative standpoint, a policy standpoint, keeping it a relevant program can't be overstated. And I thought it was important for our members to really grasp that, hopefully in this entire issue. As she mentioned, it was created and advocated for by our members way back right after I was born. And it became law, and making sure it continues to work for our members and farmers across the state. And it was then, it is now, it will always be one of our signature policy initiatives to help farmland remain productive farmland.
Leah, you and I have talked about CAUV for a long time, and I thought I knew almost everything about it. But what stands out to me with this issue of Our Ohio is how it helps all types of farms, all sizes of farms. This is really for everyone that is involved in agriculture to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think, oh, that's just for big farms or that's just for row crop farms. But really, anybody who has at least 10 acres of agricultural land, or if they have less than 10 acres, they're making $2,500 of income from their agricultural production. As long as they are engaging in commercial agricultural production on that land, they can take part in this. And while it doesn't apply to buildings, so if you have a building intensive agriculture, that's not going to help on the value of your buildings, it does help on the value of your land. In a lot of cases, it's about a half of what your property value would be if you're on the CAUV. And that's a big difference in your tax bill. So, small farmers, beginning farmers, established farmers, row crop, bees, whatever it is that you produce and sell, you really can benefit from this program. And that's the point. It's to keep that variety of agriculture and keep farmers on all types of farms across the state.
One of the farmers featured in this edition of Our Ohio is a smaller farmer, but he's a different type of farmer too. He's got some koi fish that he is running down there in South Central Ohio. Kelly, I want to talk about that visit in a bit, but Leah, you talked to this farmer because he had paperwork sitting on his desk and was thinking about not getting into the CAUV program this year. You talked him into getting that paperwork filled out and sent in.
Yeah, so Kelly had sent me some questions and asked, is this really going to be worthwhile for him? And I was able to get her the information that she was able to provide to him that showed, what the difference was in his market value versus his CAUV value. Not to mention that if you come out of the CAUV program, you have to pay recoupment. So in addition to what he was no longer going to save, he would pay back those savings from the last 3 years. And I think it was pretty clear to him quickly, what that difference was when you look at the property value. I believe his property value was about 30% less. I can't remember exactly, than what its market value would be. And, every dollar counts when you're in farming and margins are tight. And so I think he quickly saw like how much he could save, and how much he really was saving from CAV. And that's something people sometimes take for granted because if you've been on the program for a while, you may not think about what your property value would be without CAUV.
And Kelly, you headed to the farm. Tell me about that visit and how it went.
Oh, that was a great visit. Mark Depew is a great storyteller. He really has spent decades cultivating his koi farm business. He's got 72 acres down in Ross County, multiple ponds, multiple stages from spawn to selling the fish. And he really has spent a lot of time cultivating that business, cultivating his customer base. He sells throughout the Midwest, even further. But he was only recently really discovered the benefits of Farm Bureau beyond CAUV, but definitely with our correspondence with him and I and Leah talking about how it could benefit him. And he was luckily able to go get the paperwork filed, and he has, saving money he otherwise would not have. And he's been very generous with his praise of being an Ohio Farm Bureau member and getting that kind of access to that kind of knowledge and information through our benefits, and broadening his understanding of all the benefits he has as a member, that can really protect and enhance his unique farm down there. He's a very enthusiastic member.
An example of a small world is that we found someone that oversees CAUV for the entire state that also has an agriculture background, Kelly.
Absolutely. So Kelly Tennant is a lifelong farmer, still in Richland and Morrow counties. She also is the executive administrator of the Division of Tax Equalization, which is the department that oversees CAUV. Ironically, she got her start as a summer intern, basically a summer job with Franklin County Auditor's Office, and she was doing CAUV, conducting CAUV compliance reports, visiting farms. And that started a 30-year career in various auditors' offices throughout different counties in the state, where she grew all her knowledge in not only CAUV, but real estate appraisals and assessments of all types. Uniquely has prepared her for where she is now. And when I talked to her for the article, she'd only been in the role probably 2 months. But she brings a farmer perspective and a very staunch commitment to CAUV and the program with her to the new position. She's very passionate about her job, and members can now know that someone who really understands their concern, who lives their concerns, is running the ship there. So it's very good.
So both of you, as we wrap up, I want you to think about everything we covered here with CAUV and who it's meant for, not just our members, but you mentioned, Kelly, that some auditors across the county could find some information here useful. Those outside maybe of agriculture that rent their land could find this useful. What's the one takeaway, and I'll let both of you have a crack at this, that you hope members get from this issue of Our Ohio?
I'll go first, and Leah can have the last word because that's a very smart thing to do there. I hope members use this. My intention with this issue was to make it a resource. We only have so many pages we can put everything in, but to make it a resource for the context of the history, what auditors need to know, what farmers need to know, what landowners need to know, and how much we really have fought in our protecting, we being Farm Bureau, our members and our team, to protect and preserve and in some ways, enhance what needs to be changed, things like that. We'll continue to do that. We've done it for years. We'll continue to do it in the future. It remains a top policy priority. It's tied to farmland preservation, the right to farm. So many of our members very basic and core farming foundations and values. So I just hope that they can keep it as a resource to go back to and understand why it's so important.
Leah, your one takeaway.
So I have been through lots of ups and downs with CAUV and CAUV values in particular. And so what I have found over the years is the more information that we can get to our members, and oftentimes we are getting that information out to people that aren't our members too. Um, the more information that they have, like we have in this magazine, the better they understand and the better they can work to help us make it better. Because of course, all of the positions, all the things we do at Farm Bureau, they start with our members and our grassroots. So, I hope that, like Kelly said, this is a resource, but particularly for our members as they are working on their policy development, as they're talking about CAV, and that they have the whole picture, not just the values are going up, which of course is a concern, but also how much we save, how important this program is and has been and will continue to be for farmland in the state of Ohio.
These hit mailboxes the first part of July, so maybe it's sitting underneath some more of your CAUV paperwork that you got from the state of taxation on your kitchen table. Maybe you haven't got to it yet, or maybe you're halfway through it and haven't finished it. But there's also a digital version online as well. If you go to ohiofarmbureau.org, you can find it there too. Ohio Farm Bureau's Policy Counsel, Leah Curtis, and the Director of Editorial Content and Managing Editor of Our Ohio, Kelly Milligan-Stammen, are guests on the podcast. Thank you both so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ty.
Who feeds your need for new ideas for your family's best farm future? Ohio Farm Bureau. We work with our members to shape ag policy that will positively impact our industry. Farm Bureau is advancing business solutions to give you a competitive advantage. We help you gather information to stay ahead of important topics and technologies. Plus, Ohio Farm Bureau creates opportunities for growth. Ohio Farm Bureau, feeding your need for new ideas.
Find out how Nationwide Agribusiness can help you grow your business. Get to know the people with the experience and knowledge to help you. Whether you are looking to protect your farm or ranch from the ground up, or need someone who understands your changing commercial ag needs. Find out how to better manage the risks of your ag business, or how quickly you can get back to business. Learn how you can protect your next with Nationwide on your side.
After years of advocacy for Ohio Farm Bureau and its partners, the Ohio Department of Taxation announced it'll address inaccurate woodland calculations in the current agricultural use value program. These changes should result in significant tax savings for many woodland owners. To talk more about it, we bring in Leah Curtis, Policy Counsel for Ohio Farm Bureau, for this Legal with Leah. Always great to see you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Want to highlight this really good news for the CAUV program in a bit for woodland owners. But let's start with some background on how woodland is valued through the program.
So the woodland CAUV values are calculated by taking the soil's cropland value and deducting what are called costs of conversion. And one of those costs is for clearing. And so the CAUV calculation, if you attended our webinar, you want to check it out where we walk through it, it values using cropland information. So to get to a woodland value, the calculation then deducts that hypothetical investment you would have to make to clear so that that land could be used for cropland. So this is not, we're not trying to make people clear woodland. We're just doing it for math purposes. So all soils get the clearing deduction, and then soils that are poorly drained, somewhat poorly drained, or very poorly drained also get a tile drainage deduction. And there's a small group of soils that are frequently flooded soils. They get a surface drainage deduction as well.
Like everything in the calculation, these numbers are supposed to be based on data, but there has been some issues with that in the past.
Yeah, so we began advocating back in 2014 about these costs of conversion. And so in 2014, many people remember that's when we were advocating for a number of CAUV reforms, that being one of them. The woodland deductions had not been updated for a number of years. And so with that advocacy in 2016, the department did update the cost of conversion for the first time in a very long time. But the clearing cost remained low. In our opinion, and based on the data that the Forestry Association had collected. And we continue to advocate that that should be updated further, as well as we needed to continue to update these numbers. We update everything else in the formula every single year. So these clearing costs and drainage cost information should also be updated regularly. For the drainage costs, the department was using information from the cost surveys done by The Ohio State University, but they have had lower survey participation in recent years. And so they have been using the 2020 information since that year because they haven't had enough survey responses.
This advocacy has been in the works now for over 10 years, and all that hard work now resulted in a big change for those deductions.
Yes, we were very pleased to hear from the tax department this year in the public hearing for the CAUV values that they will be updating all of those deductions based on data and recent inflation information. So the Ohio Forestry Association has done a lot of legwork gathering that clearing cost data, and the department's going to use that as well as inflation information to increase the clearing cost from $1,000 deduction to over $4,000 per acre for deduction. The drainage costs, again, are going to be still based on that 2020 data from OSU, but they are using inflation information to update it to this year. And that, for example, for tile drainage has moved the number from $890 per acre to over $1,000 per acre.
So this is a big win for Ohio Farm Bureau and our members, all the work we've done to this point. But practically speaking, what does this mean?
So with these new increased deductions, it's likely that most woodland values are going to be calculated at that minimum value of $230 per acre for tax purposes. Because of our advocacy and all of that legwork, particularly done by the Ohio Forestry Association, this should help reduce those values on woodland, particularly in areas of high productivity soil. I do want to note that some woodland soils were already at the minimum value. So if you were in that situation, this will not change for you. But for a lot of our woodland values, they are now going to be down at or near that minimum value mark across the state.
And just like the conservation valuation we've talked about in the past, even though this is nice, this is not about reducing values.
Yeah, it's certainly nice to always have that lower tax bill, but we also want to make sure that CAV values are as accurate as they can be. And we don't want CAV values to prevent someone from doing something or cause them to do something just because of the taxes. So we don't want CAV value to prevent someone from installing a conservation practice on their property. And we don't want them to be clearing woodland because of high woodland values that make it more sense on the balance sheet to have it in cropland than woodland.
All right, before we go, we do want to clarify this goes into effect with the 2024 revaluations. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, as most people know, their CAV value gets updated every 3 years. So this is going to go into effect with the 2024 revaluation counties that are going to see new tax bills in 2025. Unfortunately, if you're on reappraisal last year or if you're on reappraisal next year, you will wait until that next revaluation to see these changes on your CAV value. So it does take some time. Frankly, that's just the law requires us to do that 3-year cycle. And so that's how people will eventually see this impact their individual tax bills.
It was quite a process over a decade, but hard work paid off for Ohio Farm Bureau and our members with CAUV Woodland Values. Leah Curtis, Policy Counsel for Ohio Farm Bureau, for this Legal with Leah. Thanks for all the info.
Thank you.